Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Bulk Purchase Annuity webinar, first in a series of webinars from Hayward Pension Technologies. I'm your host. My name is Spence Lynch. I'm a Business Development Director here at Hayward Pension Technologies, and I've over 25 years in pensions data experience. Hope you enjoy the webinar. We're going to start off with an introduction. Rich, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you, Spence. My name is Richard Seymour. I'm a Senior Transition Manager at the Pension Insurance Corporation. I've worked here for over 10 years and been in the industry for something over 30 years now. My role here is looking after schemes generally from point of signing through to full buy-in being completed and true-up premiums paid, or if it's a buyout through to transferring the full administration over to PIC, and I run a team that looks after that.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Rod, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good morning, folks. My name's Rod Brown. I work for Hayward Pension Technologies in the customer relationship team. I've been here for approaching a year now, but prior to working for Hayward, I had 30 years administration experience in a large defined benefit scheme, latterly as pensions manager. And in that scheme, we undertook 4 buy-ins. 2 of which were with Pension Insurance Corporation. So I know Rich from these transactions.
Great, thank you very much. And finally, Mark, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, Spence. I'm also a Business Development Director at Hayward, where Spence has got more responsibility for the data side of things. I'm working in the software side of things because before I joined Hayward, I've been running pension systems companies for quite a while. So I've got 20 odd years, like all of us, or more experience of doing this kind of thing.
Great. So the first part is pension schemes transitioning to de-risking strategies. So first, we want to look at the de-risking market in general. Rod, why is the market so buoyant right now?
Yes, so we do seem to be in a period of high activity in this market, driven primarily by gilt yields and the movement there that makes pricing much more attainable to schemes because of their funding positions. So historically, schemes would not have been in a position to transact, but now because of several factors coming together, we're in a place where a lot more schemes are in a position to transact, and their journey to buyout has been shortened because of favourable conditions.
Rich, as we expect more schemes to enter the market, can the industry actually cope with demand? Is this leading to insurers being a bit more picky, perhaps, as to who they'll engage with?
No, it's a good question. The next 2 to 3 years are going to be very busy for the industry, looking at the projections and, following on from what Rod said about gilt yields and interest rates. It's much more affordable now to secure a product. Recovery plans are significantly shortened to what they were a few years ago. Sponsors are now wanting to top up funds in the light of recovery plans being a lot shorter, and that buyout term, as Rod said, is now much more on the horizon than it was for many schemes before. But there are resource constraints across the whole industry, and that's noted at the minute. That can be in the insurance sector, the employee benefit consultant side, the administrator sector. There's a lot of people doing the same sort of work on top of their usual jobs, particularly on the administration side. With the reinsurer market, we're finding there's more players out there now, so not so much restrictions there from a reinsurance side, from an insurance perspective. But certainly on the asset side, there can be constraints sometimes, depending on when deals are going through and if there are suitable assets there to back the deals that need to be insured. So that can vary as well. I would say bigger schemes tend to get more of the interest of insurance companies just because of their size and appetite for the bigger schemes. Smaller schemes are also very attractive too. On those, I'd say it helps to demonstrate a good request for proposal process with a commitment to transact. And right now, we're looking at a number of schemes internally that are on the smaller end of the scale. So it's not always big, but it does vary essentially. And when we're looking at schemes, we consider the full profile of each scheme when we select to quote. So there's quite a lot that goes into that, and our origination team specialise in that, and they work very closely with the employee benefit consultants in that market arena.
Thanks, Rich. In your experience, Rod, what are the key things pension schemes need to prepare for prior to approaching an insurer?
Yeah, so I think Rich has touched on several areas that are helpful here. Clearly, in the light of high demand for insurers' attention, you need to be able to demonstrate that you're ready to transact. So that involves a number of things. He mentioned having assets that are suitable for a transaction, and obviously schemes would work with insurers to understand what needs to be done there. From the administration side, which is where my experience lies, it was all about data, getting data in order and being able to demonstrate that not only had you made an effort to get your data in order, but you were keeping it in order, and that things were, you know, as good as they could be. So anything that conveys to the insurer that you know what you're doing, that you've got mechanisms in place to keep things as neat as possible, then that tends to make transactions more attractive to insurers. That was certainly our experience with Pension Insurance Corporation and in all the buy-ins that we had undertaken.
I guess it's just as important to have the auditable trail to show and demonstrate
Exactly.
that it has been done, rather than just saying, oh yeah, we've done it, it's clean.
Yeah.
Thank you. Rich, from an insurer's viewpoint, does a scheme's data and benefit calculations need to be certain standard before approaching the market in the first place?
Yeah, it is helpful to have a good standard of data. There's no doubt about that. The better the data, the more accurate that initial price is and that the client will sign up to. When you get that, you've got more certainty on price and essentially less surprises at the end, because all schemes will go through what we call a true-up process. You'll sign the deal stage one, any verification work, cleansing needs to go on, will then be done, and at the end there'll be a true-up process. So if at the start you've got really good data, it means there's more certainty right at the end and less variability in price from that perspective. But it doesn't have to be completely accurate. No, we do see variations in data sets that we get, and there's an opportunity for schemes under the contracts to cleanse data, what we call a verification window, typically a year, sometimes 2. So there's a period there where they can actually go through and cleanse the data in that window, which is great because they have an opportunity to get the data final, and so the trustees can be happy the final level of benefits they're signing off are truly reflective of what the scheme rules say. So all good. But another thing about having good data at the start, if it's more accurate up front, it means the process post-transaction is going to be a lot shorter. If you have less cleaning to do and everything else, that part is much quicker, and therefore if the scheme wants to go to buyout, they can get to buyout in a quicker period of time because their data journey has been good pre-signing and less to do post-signing, essentially.
What would you, Rich, again, what would you expect trustees to have typically completed before they even approach you?
Yeah, so to get a good quote from us, we'd expect a clear benefit specification. The benefit specification is a summary of all the benefits that the members are entitled to. It's a summary of the scheme rules, and it categorises members per appropriate category, details things like escalation. So if that can be clear and accurate, then stage 1, brilliant. Stage 2, like data in a reasonable form, and that should be a lot of work should go into that as well, ideally, because the two go together. It means we can then put it through our numbers, run it with our pricing actuaries and get a quote out. The data should really reflect the benefit structure as well. So having a good Ben spec is one thing, but you really want your data to tally up to that. So if your benefit structure is talking about 5 different types of escalation, you'd expect the data set to have 5 different tranches of escalation too. If there are different NRAs on the scheme, you'd expect your data to separate that all out as well. So the two should really go hand in hand and sort of a bit of a perfect marriage there, really, from a data and a benefit specification point of view. What we find, particularly from a transitions point of view, is sometimes the administrators are not always fully engaged in the process. They know what's going on, but as a tip, I would say engage them in that early point of going to market. Let them review the benefit structure to make sure it correlates with actual practice and that they're two married, because sometimes the lawyers and consultant actuaries will devise the benefit structure, and sometimes there can be slight inconsistencies there between actual true practice and that. So it's a good first pass and letting the administrators do a review of that document, and sort of just irons out any sort of problems really at the early stages of a transaction. And the fewer problems are, then the fewer questions we'll be asking in terms of pricing.
When we're talking about data, there's always a couple of elephants in the room because there's so many variables out there with the passage of time and life events as well. So what steps would you recommend trustees take regarding preparing some of those more challenging data items like spousal data before entering the market? Rich.
Okay, so when we're talking about spousal data, we see that as what we sometimes call contingent spouse pensions. These are the benefits which are contingent upon when the member dies. So if the member dies, what level of pension will come into payment for the dependents or widows? These values in some schemes are very well maintained and up to date, but more often than not, they're not 100% accurate, and we can find that they can be quite patchy in cases. And that's typically where a scheme may have moved administrators over time or upgraded their systems to new admin platforms, and some of the more historical benefits for the older retirees may not be held and managed up to date. So when a member dies, that may need to be calculated from first principles. And this is something that would need to be calculated in a verification window, if not before, for full settlement, really, because if that member, when that member does eventually die, what is the true level of benefit that would come into payment to the spouse? So under the insurance contract, we would generally like to have that full value corrected either before coming to market or during the verification stage. It's typically quite a resource intensive task, and one of the bigger items we see in our verification pieces. So planning ahead helps, but also automation a tool, if that can be brought into the arena here, if there's any sort of system tools or using external parties to just aid with that, because it can take quite a while to calculate somebody's benefits going back 20, 25, 30 years, in fact, in some of the older retirees. So it's one that we deal with a lot, I have to say.
Thank you. Personally, we're seeing more broadly across our industry where there seems to be a bit of a seed change, where more significance and importance is being placed on fields of data that have previously been overlooked. We all know name, address, date of birth, kind of that's the kind of the standards. But we'll look at a great example is email addresses, where we're seeing the ability to leverage encryption technology to verify that an email actually belongs to the member, and then leveraging that from an engagement perspective, because surely in our utopian world of member data accuracy, the best way to get the most accurate data is to ask the member and have an engaged member. So in the de-risking process, passing a book across to say, well, we've got 70% of our members that are digitally engaged, actively engaged, that surely has some positive repercussions on the de-risking process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Having a high level of member engagement in any form is what a scheme should be opting for. And you generally find it's the deferred population that can sort of drift away a bit and genuinely forget that they've got a benefit in a scheme from many years ago. So if that can be done digitally and retained so as people go through their working life, changing emails, addresses and the like from different employers or their own personal addresses, maintaining and having that is great. And it's a data item that we welcome when we take schemes on, because often we need to track down members sometimes for certain pieces of information. So having that, it's a good piece of information to have and to keep it updated as well. And members also, now we find some schemes have their own websites. Members can interact with their own website, keep their own personal details updated, change of address, email addresses, expression of wish forms. So there's no doubt about it, the digital area is here to stay, and it's, the pensions market should recognise that and embrace it really, and keep that as much as it can on our own records. And some schemes, we see it now, digital first. They're actually using that as the first point of contact for contacting members. So it's worth putting on the agenda for schemes.
I think the impact of COVID has had on our industry and across society, people have been in environments where they've had to use digital engagement just to live the day-to-day life. So both, really, this is to Rich and Rod. So there's a lot to consider, a lot of considerations to plan for during any transaction, no matter what the stage you're at. Do pension schemes typically have in-house capabilities to prepare for buy-in and buy-out?
I'll have first go at this and then defer to Rich, because you'll have wider experience of the market than I do. But my feel for this is that some of the bigger schemes may have in-house capability, but they have so much on their radar now, you know, just to process business as usual, and getting resource in-house is becoming increasingly difficult. COVID in some cases has played into that, because people don't necessarily have to work locally to where they live. So some schemes are, you know, benefiting from that, but some of the smaller schemes possibly less so. So I suspect, based on what Rich has already said and what we're seeing, that more and more schemes are looking outside to external third-party resources to address certain aspects of the buy-in, buy-out process. Would that be a fair comment, Rich?
Yeah, no, I completely echo everything you've said there, Rod. The big schemes are the ones that need the management, and they generally have their own in-house project teams, but there's always projects within pensions. Anyone knows that has worked in the industry for a certain period of time. So there's always a list of resource. You typically don't find an over-resourced pensions department, in my experience, in any firm, whether it's in-house or the TPA markets. Everyone's fighting for the same resource. And when a buy-in or buy-out project comes along, it's not just a little piece of work. There's a big piece of work there, particularly post-signing, that involves the people that know the scheme and the sort of the projects area. So any assistance that's been given there, great. First and foremost, for any admin team, they're there to deliver BAU to the member population and deal with the transfer values, the deaths, the retirements, etc. And everything else is a bit secondary, but nonetheless very important. So yeah, larger schemes we find have project teams, but resource-wise, if it's there, great. Not always over-resourced, as I said. On the TPA market, generally there are specialist departments, especially with the bigger TPAs, that have verification teams, de-risking teams now, GMP reconciliation teams where schemes are administered by them. But yeah, there's a bit of a cross-section depending on what you're talking about. And if the schemes are very small, then it's often just done within the admin team. So it just needs to be planned ahead. If there's a big project like a buy-in or a buyout coming up, where you're just talking 200, 300, 400 life scheme, your verification items may not be so significant, so they might be able to manage that within the team itself, as long as it doesn't interfere with other key tasks that they have to do.
Thanks, Rich. We're just coming to the end of the second phase, and there's a question been posed by Mark Rugman. Thank you, Mark. On the spouse pensions point, would you expect schemes to have a current value for pension members, or just a basic value at date pension started for the member, which would need to be revalued before put into payment?
Yeah, so that's something we see very frequently. Ideally, we want the current value, because that the date a scheme goes on risk, we will take the value at that point in time. That's the risk date. And what are the benefits that, in theory, if that member was to die on that day, would be payable? So that's one, any associated death benefits, and what would the associated spouse benefit be at that date? But it's very common to see with administrators that spouse pension value is held at date of retirement. So when we come to do pricing, there often won't be time for administrators to look at the contingent spouse figure. So we may be asked to put some assumptions in there just to get the first price out, and that's absolutely fine. But during that verification window, we'd expect values to be brought up to date at the risk transfer date.
Thank you. So the third and final part of the webinar is using data and technology to expedite the buy-in, buy-out process. So moving on to practical uses of data and technology and how it can be used to expedite the de-risking process and alleviate some of the challenges funds and insurers face. How can data and technology be deployed to cleanse data and run benefit audits at scale? Mark?
Well, I think scale's the important thing there, isn't it, Spence? Because, you know, we've all seen the projections, and the graph goes off the charts over the next few years for what we're expecting to see in terms of schemes coming to market. And, you know, schemes have been de-risking for a while, but there hasn't been a huge amount of individual deals. There's been large deals, and, you know, it's been going on for years, but I think we're getting to a point where there's going to be, you know, an awful lot more deals. But up to now, most of the work has been bespoke. You know, by its very nature, it's had to be bespoke. It's taken a while to see what the whole picture looks like, which you really need to know before you can begin to automate the process. But I think we're kind of there now. I mean, up till now, when you think of a benefit audit, you're thinking about a line-by-line audit on Excel. You know, when you're thinking about data, you're thinking about manual tracing. I mean, it's all very expensive and it all takes lots of time, which might be all right in the context of a huge deal. But we're coming to a time now with these predictions of growth in the market. It's not just going to be the larger schemes, it's smaller and medium schemes. Automation isn't going to be something that's going to be nice to have or an alternative route. It's absolutely essential to be able to use, you know, modern technology to get to where you want to be at a faster rate and, you know, with more accuracy. And, you know, like Rich was saying, and Rod was saying as well, we already know that there's bandwidth issues in the market. You know, that's at insurer level as well, because there's only a certain amount of insurers doing this kind of business, but it's across the industry. In the pensions industry, it's the same. Schemes, as Rod was saying, are struggling, but advisors as well, EBCs, because the BAU's there, but they've dashboard to deal with, you know, GMPE to deal with, everything to deal with. And now this, you know, on top of it, in an era which we already know pensions admin is constrained because there's just so much going on, and there just aren't enough good people to do all the work that's being talked about. So yeah, we do need technology to help. And when you think what can be applied right now, you've got data analytics, so you can start looking at cohorts of data rather than going line by line, and you know, or you can use modern insights type technology. And you know, you can look at where you're actually going to get the most benefit from in terms of the work that you're going to have to do. Individuals that might have records that aren't quite right, whether that's calculation results or just records of people who don't live where they used to live and what have you. And we can drill down into that much more quickly than we used to be able to using analytics tools. And we've got rules-based engines. That's the thing. I mean, but the vast majority of schemes are still administered using legacy systems 20 plus years old, or even Excel. But the ability to define benefit rules and automate them has come on leaps and bounds in the last few years. I'm not suggesting anybody would convert to those systems, because if you've got a business as usual system that's is working along and doing your calcs for you, that's great. But if you're coming to an external project like this where you've got to look at the calculations in a different light, then why not use much better, newer automated systems that are available now that 99% of schemes in the country just aren't using. And also, the kind of thing that you were talking about, Spence, appending emails, driving digital journeys, finding spousal records and, all that kind of thing. It's not just a one piece. You've got to look at the whole thing, but there's lots of tools out there that can be used to get to a much better place for all size schemes.
On that point, how's Haywood planning to implement these solutions to help both schemes and the insurer?
Well, Haywood's in a great place to help with this for a couple of reasons. There's all that experience there because, we talk about business as usual in the EBCs, business as usual at Haywood, the same kind of thing, isn't it? Lots of people with lots of experience doing calculations, implementations, data work. But on top of that, it's what's gone on over the last few years in terms of, I was just talking about being able to interrogate data using modern analytics tools, being able to write calculations quicker, being able to audit benefits much quicker than on traditional legacy systems. And so it's pretty much what I've been talking about. Those things that will be able to help. That's what Haywood's really been investing in the last few years, together with the data kind of work that you've been working on. We've got best in class for it all. And then we've just won a couple of awards for it. But yeah, and I think we're bringing them together to be able to say, yes, we can, help you in any way in this journey.
Thank you. As we close the webinar, any final thoughts with regards to preparing for de-risking or advice to schemes or insurers? Rich?
So, yeah, I suppose a few things really. Engaging with all parties early on, I think it's important that everyone involved in the process knows what's going on and estimated timescales. There's a lot will be required of certain people on that journey, so early engagement and full sort of disclosure to those people what's intended will be only beneficial to the whole outcome of what's happening. Having a good RFP process in place. Let's see what's going to go on, what's expected, where the data is, any sort of various, how many insurers are going to be involved in the process. All good to know during that process. And very much for the administration side, bring the administrator on the journey. They're the ones who are going to be very significantly involved in this process. So keep them abreast of what's going on. And from a planning ahead point of view, particularly resource wise, that can only help as well. So there'd be my sort of, I suppose, key areas really in doing a transaction to get to the full end and buy out ultimately for those that are going down that journey. Thanks. Mark?
Well, yeah, what Richard said really, also to note that there are bottlenecks in the market, so schemes have got to get ready and be aware that they're competing with other schemes to be able to get in front of the insurers. So you've got to do the work early and you've got to do it right. So if you're thinking about this journey, you've got to start investigating it sort of now. Brilliant.
Well, that brings our webinar to a close. I think it's only a matter of hours before Sky ring me. I hope you all found it very, very useful. We only had one question posed, but if there are any questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out and we'll happily address them. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.